Vanessa stood before the grand mirror in the walk-in closet, adjusting the strap of her crimson dress. The silky fabric clung to her curves in all the right places, accentuating the beauty she had always known was her greatest weapon. A diamond bracelet, one of many gifts from David, glittered against her wrist as she smirked at her reflection. David, her husband of 7 years, sat on the edge of their pristine king-size bed, watching in silence. His crisp navy suit was still impeccable, as if he hadn't just come from a 12-hour workday. His sharp, calculating gaze never left Vanessa's form, but his face revealed nothing. He had learned long ago that showing emotion only fed her arrogance. Vanessa turned slightly, checking the dress from another angle. Then, with a satisfied nod, she grabbed her designer clutch and turned toward the door. "You should be grateful I even married you," she said, voice laced with condescension. "Most men would be lucky to have someone like me." David didn't flinch. He simply reached into the nightstand drawer and pulled out a sleek, leather-bound folder. The prenup. Vanessa barely spared a glance, her expression dripping with boredom. What, are we reviewing bedtime stories now? David flipped the document open to a particular page where a section had been highlighted. Then, finally, he looked up at her. His voice was calm, almost amused. "You leave me, you leave with nothing." For the first time that evening, Vanessa hesitated. Her gaze flickered to the document, then back to David. Her usual smirk faltered just slightly before she forced a scoff. "You bluffin'," she said. David merely turned the folder around, letting her read it for herself. The clause was clear. Adultery voids all spousal support. Vanessa's breath hitched, her perfectly manicured fingers twitched at her side. David watched as the truth set in, as the color drained just a shade from her flawless face. But still, she tried to recover. "The thing is years old," she said, her voice suddenly dry. "You can't possibly—" "I can." David leaned back against the headboard, relaxed, powerful. "And I will." For the first time, Vanessa wasn't sure what to say. She had spent years treating David like a safety net, a stable, predictable man who would always be there no matter what. She had flaunted her affairs in his own home, assuming his silence meant weakness. Now, she realized her mistake. David wasn't weak, he was patient, and she had just walked into her own trap. Vanessa's fingers curled around the strap of her purse, gripping it like a lifeline. The air in the bedroom, once thick with her usual dominance, had shifted, heavily, unmistakably, in David's favor. She swallowed, forcing a laugh, but it came out thinner than she intended. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" David didn't answer right away. He took his time, tapping a finger against the open prenup, his wedding band glinting under the chandelier's soft glow. Then he smiled. "Small, deliberate, and not as much as you enjoyed parading your affairs under my nose?" Vanessa's breath hitched, but she squared her shoulders. "David, be reasonable. This is just a technicality, a piece of paper. You wouldn't actually—" "I would." His voice, steady and controlled, cut through her sentence like a blade. "And I have." Vanessa blinked. "What do you mean you have?" David set the prenup aside and reached for his phone. With a casual swipe, he opened a folder labeled Vanessa. Her stomach dropped. Images. Screenshots. A video of her laughing in a dimly lit restaurant, leaning just a little too close to Ryan. Another of her stepping into a hotel lobby, hand in hand with him. Texts. Some flirty, some explicit, all undeniable. Her pulse pounded against her temples. You were spying on me?" David chuckled. "No need, you made it easy. You thought I was oblivious, that I didn't notice the late-night meetings, the sudden obsession with your phone, the way you dressed up more for your girls' nights than you ever did for our anniversaries." Vanessa licked her lips, mind racing. She needed to flip this. Fast. "This is insane," she snapped. "You can't control me, David. You can't just trap me in this marriage." David leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. "Who said I was trapping you? You're free to go." He gestured to the door. "Right now, if you'd like." Vanessa's throat tightened. That wasn't how this was supposed to go. David was supposed to fight for her, plead, maybe even offer to renegotiate, but he wasn't. He was watching her unravel, waiting for her to realize she had played herself. Her mind screamed for a way out. If Ryan was serious about her, she could walk out with her dignity intact. She snatched her phone, dialing him. He picked up on the third ring. "Hey, babe," she purred, forcing confidence into her tone. "Guess what? I'm single." Silence. Then, a short chuckle. "Ooh," Ryan said, amusement clear. "That's not what I signed up for." Vanessa's knees nearly gave out. Vanessa's grip on her phone tightened as Ryan's words echoed in her ear. "That's not what I signed up for." She let out a strained laugh, hoping she'd misheard him. "Excuse me? You heard me." Ryan's tone was lighter than it should have been. like they were discussing the weather, not her entire future. Look, Vanessa, you're gorgeous, you know that. But I'm not looking for what? A live-in girlfriend? That's not my scene. Vanessa's stomach churned. But we talked about this, she insisted, her voice pitching higher. You said you wanted us to be together. I said I liked spending time with you. Ryan corrected. There's a difference. Heat flooded Vanessa's face. She turned away from David as if that could somehow shield her humiliation. Ryan, don't do this. I left everything for you. You left everything for you, he shot back. Don't put that on me. A lump rose in Vanessa's throat. Her perfect plan, her glorious exit, was crumbling before her eyes. She was supposed to leave David triumphant, draped on Ryan's arm, stepping into a future of luxury and excitement. Instead, she stood alone, phone pressed to her ear, barely holding on to her composure. David, still seated on the bed, watched in silence, his expression unreadable, his patience unnerving. Ryan! She tried again, her voice softer now, desperate. Please, just, let's talk about this. Just he sighed. Vanessa, I don't do baggage, and right now you're carrying a whole damn suitcase. The line went dead. Vanessa stared at the screen, her reflection staring back at her. Stunning, flawless, yet suddenly powerless. Her fingers trembled as she lowered the phone. David finally spoke. Problem? Her eyes snapped to his, rage and panic swirling together. You set this up, she hissed. You knew he wouldn't take me in. David tilted his head slightly, amusement flickering in his gaze. I didn't have to set anything up. I just knew you better than you thought. Vanessa clenched her jaw. No. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. She straightened her spine, forced a smirk onto her lips. Fine, she said breezily, tossing her phone into her purse. I don't need Ryan. I have plenty of options. David lifted an eyebrow. Ooh. She met his gaze, refusing to blink. You think you've won? You think I need you? Please. I'll land on my feet. David nodded, slow and knowing. I'm sure you will. Vanessa turned sharply on her heel, walking toward the door with as much poise as she could muster. But the moment she reached for the handle, click, her hand froze midair. She turned back. David! He held up her house key between two fingers. I had the locks changed this afternoon, he said smoothly, just in case you got any ideas. Vanessa's blood ran cold. He leaned back, utterly at ease. You leave me, Vanessa, you leave with nothing. The weight of reality crashed down on her. She had nowhere to go, no home, no safety net. And for the first time in her life, Vanessa was truly. Vanessa stood frozen, her breath shallow, her fingers still hovering near the doorknob. The weight of David's words sank into her bones. You leave me, Vanessa. You leave with nothing. A slow, creeping chill crawled up her spine. No, she whispered, barely audible. Then, louder, firmer, as if saying it again would make it true. No. David didn't respond. He didn't need to. The smirk playing at the corner of his lips said everything. Vanessa turned back to the door and grasped the handle, twisting sharply. It didn't budge. The cold metal pressed against her palm, the finality of it sending a wave of panic through her chest. She whirled around. David, this is insane. Her voice was sharp, edged with desperation. You can't just lock me out of my home. David exhaled, almost lazily, as he rose from the bed. His movements were unhurried, controlled, calculated. It was never your home, Vanessa, he said coolly, slipping his hands into his pockets. It was ours. Until you decided you were done playing house. Vanessa's throat tightened. So what, you just throwing me out like trash? David tilted his head. I'm letting you walk away just like you wanted. His voice remained infuriatingly calm. Except now, you're walking away with exactly what you brought into this marriage. She blinked. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Nothing. She had nothing. No, she snapped, shaking her head. I'll fight this. I'll get a lawyer. David's smirk deepened. Go ahead. Her stomach dropped. She knew the prenup. She signed it herself. Her confidence cracked, just slightly. You wouldn't really let me leave with nothing. David raised a brow. You were ready to leave me for another man. Why do you suddenly care about what I'd let you do? Vanessa's lips parted, but no words came out. David stepped closer, stopping just short of her. This wasn't an accident, Vanessa. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment betrayal. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. You were sure I'd always be here, that I'd tolerate it, that you could walk all over me and still land on your feet. He straightened, stepping back. Turns out you miscalculated. Vanessa's chest rose and fell, her world caving in around her. David crossed his arms. So what's it gonna be? Vanessa had no answer because, for the first time, she had no moves left to play. Vanessa's hands trembled as she clutched her purse, her mind scrambling for a way out. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had spent years believing that no matter what she did, David would always be there. A steady, unwavering safety net. He was the dependable one, the one she could mock, dismiss, and betray without consequence. Yet now, as she stood before him, stripped of her arrogance, of her illusions, she realized just how wrong she had been. David wasn't fighting for her. He wasn't begging. He was done. Vanessa swallowed hard, lifting her chin, forcing a smile. Fine, she said, her voice laced with artificial confidence. I'll figure something out. David simply nodded. I'm sure you will. That was it. No pleading, no asking her to stay, just indifference. And somehow that was worse than any shouting match could have been. She turned back to the door, willing herself to stay composed. She would walk out with grace. She wouldn't let him see how deeply this was cutting her. But as she reached for the handle again, instinctively she pulled out her key, only to remember it no longer worked. Her throat tightened. A shaky breath left her lips as she hesitated, just long enough to let the weight of it all sink in. Then, with a final deep breath, she opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The cold air of the corridor hit her like a slap. She turned, expecting, hoping David would stop her, call her name, give her one last chance. But all she saw was the door closing. And then, click, locked out for good. Her heart pounded as she reached for her phone, scrolling to David's contact. She hovered over the call button, biting her lip, pride warring with panic. Finally, she tapped the screen. The phone rang once, twice. Then, call blocked. Vanessa stood motionless, staring at the screen, her reflection glaring back at her. No home. No money, no right. No David. For the first time in her life, she had lost everything. And there was no one left to blame but herself.